What is up, everybody? Welcome back to another edition of the Big Five Pod, episode number 132. I'm sure you're sick of hearing these intros by now and our voices, but we're not sick of talking to you, so that's just how it's going to go. I'm, of course, your co-host, Kyle Morello. Got my co-host, Jake Kosick, here with me once again, and continuing on with our preview week, the last of the individual team previews before, spoiler alert, we do a Big Five preview coming out on Monday. We've got Tyler Cronin from Three Big League coming on here once again to talk about St. Joe's as we did the last time, but also LaSalle, and then, of course, the A10 as well. Tyler, not too long ago since we've seen you, but in that time, how have you been?
I'm pretty good. How are you, gentlemen?
Doing all right. Doing all right. Listen, we're as we were talking about right before this, we're definitely a little tired. We're doing a lot of work. I know you have too, but 'tis the season. Am I right? We're a few days away from college basketball.
Yeah, and apparently you guys got better lit setups than I do. It's looking a little dark on my camera here, and apparently my lamp's not plugged in, so we're going to keep it that way.
Listen, it is what it is. It is what it is. First and foremost, before I ask Cope how he's doing, I do notice that Chelsea scarf up there. I have the same exact one. I'm also a Chelsea fan, so up the Chelsea, and Cope is too. So love that, first of all. But Cope, we'll go to you now. How you doing?
Yeah, we're doing well, Tyler. It's good to see you again. Feels like it was like a week ago we had you on to talk about the Billy Lang departure, how quickly the off season is moving as we're a mere 4 days away from the start of the season. Coincidentally, I put on my ACC tournament shirt here. I know you're a big ACC guy with your up the coast stuff, and it's a good thing I wore this and not my latest Chelsea jersey, because the last time I bought one, I bought a Lukaku jersey that's unfortunately collecting dust in the closet because I'm too embarrassed to wear it.
See, that's why I just have shirts. Like I've gotten the jersey, but without the name on the back.
Fair enough.
Keeps it timeless.
I need to get on that wave. I have the Yokohama Tires one with like the steel like girders of the bridge on it. My favorite one because there's no name on the back. You can wear it anytime. But let's not get distracted.
I don't want to get distracted either, but I do want to say my one jersey is Conte, and it was right before he left too. So we're on the same boat here. But we could talk about Premier League and Chelsea all day, but we're here to talk about LaSalle, St. Joe's, and the A10. So why don't we start with those Explorers? Cope and I were at open practice a couple weeks ago, which was a lot of fun seeing those guys and talking to the staff who we've gotten a little bit friendly with, and they're great. But Tyler, I want to hear your thoughts on this team, because the media, and I know we're part of the media, but the general media, not very high on this Explorers team, which isn't a shock to anybody considering that's how it normally has been for the last however many years. But for this team in particular now, year one under Darius Nichols, a new system. They're going to play a bunch of guys that we'll get into some of those players who have come in. But what are your expectations for this first year under Darius Nichols and where they might end up in the A10? Will they be at the bottom?
Yeah, look, I'm not super high on this roster either. I think just really the fact of the matter is that they appear to not have kind of the requisite top end talent for an A10 level school that you need to be able to compete with the stars at Dayton, with the Robbie Avilas at St. Louis, the Rafael Castros at GW. I do think that there is a lot of quality players on this team. And it seems like Darius Nichols has a grasp on exactly what he wants this team to be about, the mentality that he wants, and that this is going to be the kind of team that no matter what the talent gap is going to just try to punch people in the mouth every single game. And that alone, with just the depth that they have, is enough that they won't be in the bottom. But does that mean 12th place, 10th place, 9th? I'm not sure. I would have a lot of surprise if you tell me that this team goes much better than about 500 in league play, though.
Tyler, to your point, I want to touch on like the mentality and the makeup of this team. I do think that they're going to win some games that they shouldn't with their depth, and I think what's interesting what they're doing is as opposed to a Bonaventure who never really plays a deep bench and probably won't play one this year. With the amount of guys they have, maybe it's not the top end talent, but there's just so many bodies they have, especially the big guys that we can get into, that I do think they're going to wear people down, and that style of play is going to win them some games. Because guess what? This LaSalle team last couple of years under Frank Dunphy just didn't have that kind of depth. And they had some talented players, but they they didn't have quite the bodies, and they could not absorb an injury like this team could this year with the amount of options they have. But the rebounding, the defense, the size that they're going to have. Tyler, I'd like to read just some stats if you want to get a glimpse into how this team is going to be. I don't know if you saw any of the box score from the Ursina scrimmage yesterday, and I get that it's a scrimmage against a D3 team. 40 free throws, 55 rebounds, 3 of 19 from the three-point line. Like, maybe it's the shooting's not going to be there. It's going to be gritty, not pretty. They're just going to wear you down, get to the line, grab rebounds, and over 40 minutes, foul trouble, fatigue, they're going to try to grind you down to a nub here. So I like the style that Darius Nichols is building. I think he knows he brought in some of his Radford guys that exemplify what he wants. They'll know what he wants, and I think some of these guys that he's brought in reflect exactly his 12 over your 7 mentality he wants to have. But maybe you don't see that quality, like you said, with the Dayton guards or with a Castro GW or some of the highly touted guys that VCU brought in. But over the course of a roster that they have, the 10 to 12 guys that could play, I think they'll be very solid and they'll wear people down.
Yeah, the R12 over your 7 is exactly what I like about LaSalle. But the flip side is it's a 5-on-5 game. And sometimes the other team's 5 is just going to be better than LaSalle's. So I feel like that's actually a great way to sum it up.
Yeah, and that's the thing is that it's, how based on your situation, how do you win? Like, I don't want to get off topic and get into different schools here, but like, look at Cornell and even Brian Earl down at William and Mary. How do you win? Plays this frenetic style, makes hockey subs, whatever you have to do to win specific to your school. And just with their money situation, that, they don't have what a Dayton has or VCU has to pay these star players to come in. You just bring in bodies, you kind of spread the wealth amongst the roster. And if this is how you think you can win at LaSalle because maybe you don't have those resources to pay stars, I think this is the way you do it. This is how you do it by having a bunch of guys in there and wearing people down. But to your point, it's a 5-on-5 game. It's not, we're not playing football here 11-on-11.
Yeah, and I think part of the reason why you bring in a guy like Darius Nichols, who succeeded at another kind of resource-unrich place like Radford, is for that type of mentality. And I think because we see the constant portal changes, and it's a similar situation for Fordham this year. Everyone wants to win immediately. I think you bring in a guy like Darius Nichols to a place like LaSalle not to win year 1, but to win year 3, year 4, and that this is just the start of a building. If they come out of this with a solid foundation to this program, I'd consider it a very successful year.
Yeah, and I think that's kind of what we're seeing a lot with all the Big 5 schools that have hired. There's been 4 new coaches in this coaching cycle in this offseason for Big 5 schools. I think this one is the most like we need to lay a foundation and get that process going. It's true for all of them, but particularly for this one because there just has not been that there. Since I don't know when, to be quite honest with you. I mean, obviously they made a Sweet 16, over a decade ago, but it just hasn't been there. So I think, with the experience of Radford, being an under-resourced school, like you mentioned, Tyler, building this system, they have the personnel for it. Like you said, they don't have necessarily the top-end talent, but they can get there eventually, I think. They've already got some, decent high school recruits coming in the next couple of years, it seems like, too. So they're getting more attention on that. But for this year, they're going to compete. I think they're going to be in games, and they're going to give people a little bit of trouble. But again, I don't think they'll be able to win and maybe as many as they would like. Let's go into the roster, though, a little bit before we, eventually shift our way over to Hawk Hill. But let's each give a couple guys. And, they're going to play all these guys. So there's going to be a lot of guys in this roster that we're going to be able to talk about really contributing this year. Tyler, let's start with you. Give me a couple guys that you are high on this year that you think will be able to make a difference for the Explorers.
Yeah, I start with 2. Jerome Brewer, who has apparently been the leader in rebound championship belt takings. I don't know. That's not really a sentence, but he has gotten the most rebounds in practice more than anyone else throughout the summer and fall. That's what Darius Nichols told us during Media Day. He's certainly the highest pedigree, most talented profile of a player coming in. guy who was a dominant big man at Texas A&M Commerce back when they beat St. Joe's a couple of years ago, was preseason all defense in the Southland last year for McNeese. He ended up getting hurt and never playing a second for the Cowboys. So I expect him to be the most likely answer to who will LaSalle's best player be. But the other guy I'm really looking at just as a critical role guy, probably next to Brewer, if I had to guess, this is maybe their two starting forwards, but Justin Archer, another guy who barely played last year at Georgia State. He was a starter at Radford the year before under Nichols, led the Big South in rebounding. Those two together, now maybe it depends on position. If they play them with a traditional center, that's going to be the biggest forward duo in the A10. They are going to be the keys to this physically punishing LaSalle lineup, and Archer specifically, I feel like will be critical to the LaSalle defense.
Yeah, and I would touch on a couple other guys. I want to touch on those guys very quickly. With Justin Archer only staying at 6'7", Tyler, but look at some of his numbers on KenPom. I mean, this was like a perennial guy who was top 10, top 20 in the nation on both ends of the floor, rebounding wise. Part of the thing of wearing people down is, and when we talked to Darius in the summer, it was guys that are nationally ranked in some of those categories, making sure they bring those guys in. Like those KenPom nationally ranked guys, that stuff will translate if you're that good. And for a guy like him, even at 6'7", crashes the boards as hard as anybody else. They'll need that rebounding, especially on the defensive end. And then with Brewer, I mean, a local guy comes in with some pedigree. They did beat St. I think they were called A&M Commerce the year after they were East Texas A&M. The year he left, they became East Texas A&M. But yeah, if you put him out there to potentially play the three, like even with Archer at 6'7", like you have a lot of size here on the floor just to gobble up rebounds and shrink the floor. So Brewer was definitely one of the bigger gets. And another important thing with Archer is like being a Darius Nichols guy from those Radford days, even though he had a very short season at Georgia State. Being a Radford guy, knowing what he expects is big time coming over there. I'm going to give two guys and then I'll kick it over to Kyle. First, I did an article on Josiah Harrison, Mid-Major Madness in the summer. Very well-traveled dude. Kind of funny story how he got hooked up with Darius after he went to St. Francis of Brooklyn, and then they closed their doors, so he was forced to leave, and he ended up getting connected with Darius. But another guy, bouncy, athletic, strong, been in college going into his sixth season. He's another very, very good rebounder on both ends, a dude that's also just very, very strong with broad shoulders in the paint to score. So he's going to probably play one of these positions. Again, another guy that's going to be playing it for Darius for his third season, knows what to expect, and just another one of those bigs that they can switch out and always keep fresh bodies up front. But I think potentially the best player on this team is going to be Rob Dockery. I had the chance to not only go to open practice, but I was at another practice as well. Staff raves about this guy. And you look at size, length, athleticism, power. He was a really good football player in high school. Call him Mr. Versatility. When we talked to Darius, he said that he could be a guy that's got 10 points, 5 rebounds, 5 assists, a lockdown defender, going to draw one of the hardest assignments every night, get it and get steals as well. But it's 6'6", 215, a dude that can handle it a little bit, shoot it a little bit, literally can do just a little bit of everything, and no matter the position or what he's asked to do, can really provide LaSalle with whatever they need on a nightly basis. But I'm telling you, circle Rob Dockery. There's a shot he ends up as this team's best player come the end of the season.
I certainly think that's a possibility, Cope. All right, my two guys that I want to go over here. Cope, I'm going to go to the other Harris. I'm going to go Truth Harris. This one, senior guard, coming over from Radford. Started his career at East Tennessee State, did a couple years JUCO, but really, really good three-point shooting, which I think is one thing that this team does not have a lot of. Cope, as you mentioned in the exhibition against Ursinus, what did you say they were? 3 of 19? Yeah. Mm-hmm. So not great. And they're obviously not every night is going to be a performance like that, but there are going to be nights where they're going to have those performances, and this is someone who can help with that. And of course, I know he was involved in that as well, but shot almost 44% last year on 3 attempts. 35% the year before. So maybe not as so much volume, but someone who can definitely put the ball in the basket from long range. But also a senior. He's played under Darius Nichols for a couple years. So I really like Truth Harris. And then the other one who I don't think I've heard a lot of people talk about like at all other than Cope when we were at open practice, and that's Bowen Beatty, 7-footer coming over from Sacramento State. How many true 7-footers are there in the A10? I don't know. I don't know how many there are. And Tyler, maybe you can help me out with that too. But I know there's a lot of true 7-footers in the A10, and this guy was one of the better offensive rebounders in the Big Sky last couple of years. I believe he might have been on an all-rookie team in the Big Sky.
He was.
Yes. So this is someone of talent. He only played in 16 games last year, only started one. But this is someone who I think, if their mentality is going to be to rebound that, John, as you guys have all seen the, the marketing campaign and the shirts and all that, which I think is awesome. But if their objective is to grab boards, run the floor, I think this is someone who can help a lot with that. And, maybe doesn't start, but he's certainly going to be a piece off the bench that can help. And, probably a little bit of a nightmarish matchup as well, too, just with his sheer size. So that's another player who I'm very, very high on. All right. One more thought on LaSalle before we step out of here. Tyler, any final thoughts on LaSalle and, anything before we move on to St. Joe's?
Well, first off, just a quick glance here. I'm counting 5 true 7-footers in the A10 this year. So there you go on that one. My big thought, you mentioned 3-point shooting. I'm just kind of concerned about the backcourt in general. Everything we've heard is about the rebounding. And you look at this roster, there's like 8 or 9 different big guys who seem like A10 level players. And you quickly get to those 2 starting guard spots. And Jaden Johnson, I don't know if you guys know anything about his injury situation, but it sounds like he was in a boot. He didn't play in the exhibition. Truth Harris. And then it's basically just like Eric Acker coming back. Those are more or less your point guard candidates. And one of those guys could certainly break through. Jaden Johnson was the only bright spot on an awful Old Dominion team last year. But there's not a ton of backcourt flexibility in what tends to be a guards league come February and March.
That's a good point to bring up. And I mean, when we were at open practice, Jaden Johnson at least did play in that sporadically. He wasn't in the whole time, but he did come in and at least play the beginning half of practice. Not sure if that's going to be a day-to-day thing or a long-term thing. I guess we won't really know until Wednesday when I'm there at Glazier in person. But behind him, yes, you have Truth Harris. Yes, you have Eric Acker. But I think somebody you got to watch at the guard spot is Ashton Walker. Pretty nice size. He was a Radford commit who then followed Darius when he had taken the job. And it's just kind of slim pickings with the guards because there is so much size on this team. But I'm telling you, the Ashton Walker guy to look out for, 6'5", 190, can probably play both guard spots. But if they need him at point, that's the spot he'll play. Jaden Marshall as well at the guard spot. And shooting-wise, this is probably going to be this could be their best shooter in Jaden Marshall coming over from Niagara. So, no, it's a valid point because I think the whole time we see Jaden Johnson as like the shoe-in starting point guard. He was actually a guy who was recruited heavy by Darius before he committed to Old Dominion. So I think the thought all offseason was that he would come in, he'd be the starting point guard, not really a great shooter in his own right, being a sub 30% guy. But no, it's all valid. There's a lot of size, there's a lot of big men, there's a lot of positional size, I think, at some of the forward spots. But not only Tyler's at a guards game when you get into conference play, but it's a guards game when you get into March and when you get late in the year. So, yes, it's very much a valid point. But another guy to put a pin in, I'm telling you, Ashton Walker, nice size. They're really excited about him, almost like when Deuce was there last. Obviously, Deuce Jones is a kind of in a league in his own, but they really like this Ashton Walker as well. Keep an eye on him.
And that we will. All right, we're going to take our attention away from the Explorers. We're going to go to the Hawks, and we're going to talk about St. Joe's, another program in year one of a new coach, as we talked in depth about the last time you were on, Tyler, but Steve Donahue taking over for Billy Lang as he left for the Knicks in a player development role. And even still, I think there's a lot to be excited about with this St. Joe's team. Some players they had to replace, some talent coming back that they've had, some guys getting a little healthier than what they might have been last year, kind of lower on the bench. So I think this team might surprise people, just like I also kind of think some people might be a little bit down on LaSalle too. Not that I think it's, that apples to apples comparison, but I think, people aren't so high on this team. I'm looking at Ken Palm right now. They have them as 7th, which I think is kind of the consensus, is where a lot of people have the St. Joe's team going into the year, finishing 9-9 in the A10. Tyler, what do you think about this roster in year one under Steve Donahue?
Yeah, they are purely in my wild cards category of the A10 standings. I'm not particularly sure what to think of them. The high-end talent, where you talk about guys returning from injury and these incoming transfers, it's really easy to see a scenario where Deuce Jones and Jaden Glover and Steven Solano and Al Amadou all play their best next season, and now all of a sudden this is a 5th, 6th place team like last year. You could also look at it the other way, something we talked about the last time I was on when Billy Lang left. Maybe he saw the writing on the wall that this is a bad team, and that's why he bolted. I think in the end, they probably end up somewhere in the middle. And the preseason ranking is probably close to accurate with this team.
I would agree. I think right smack in the middle at 7th is where I would put them. They were 5th last year. They did not earn a top 4 bid, and they were really right. They were in it to the very end. And a loss at LaSalle to Fran Dunphy ultimately cost them that top 4 spot. But there's so much talent on this team, and bringing Deuce Jones over from LaSalle, you know exactly what he's going to bring. He's going to be the tone setter on both ends, be able to get to the rim, hopefully an improved shooter. I think he will be an improved shooter under Steve Donahue. And if Jaden Glover is as good as advertised, which I think there's a real shot that he could be, a Deuce Jones, Jaden Glover backcourt is going to be electric. I mean, 2 springy, bouncy, fast, athletic guys that can score, that can get to the paint. In the case of Glover, a very good shooter. I'm excited about the thought of what this team could be, because not only do they have a very good, young, exciting guard duo, if both those guys can mesh and play well together, but some of the bigs they have and some of the athletes they have, and you look at the bigger forwards they have, and Al Amadou being able to switch out on the perimeter. If Steven Solano can back up Justice Ajabo, the chance to have a monstrous center in there at all times for the Hawks to anchor the paint. Like, I see depth, I see athleticism, and quite frankly, Tyler, I just see so much talent here that regardless of the coaching situation, like I don't think this is a team that's going to, even with the coaching change, is going to slide into the pillow fight. Like, I think this is right smack in the middle, and I really have a hard time dropping them any lower than 7th, just because I think there's just too much talent here. Coaching change, Billy Lang, Steve Donahue or not, there's a ton of talent on this team. Some returners as well. They lose their 3 leading scorers from a year ago, but the point being is that a Finkley, a Haskins, I think, can take another leap, and just with the talent that they brought in, there's just too many good players on this team, in my opinion, to drop them any lower than that. Right smack in the middle at 7th, I think, is perfect, even given the circumstances, too. You don't give them a bump going up. Like, maybe 7 is a little conservative, but I think 7 right there is good for them.
Yeah, I agree. And even though I said I do think they can surprise some people, I think if you're playing the law of averages, I think, like you both said, that right in the middle there at 7 of not being toward the top of the league, not being in the basement in the pillow fight, probably the most likely scenario for this team. All right, let's do an exercise now. Instead of doing players we like, let's figure out a weakness and a strength for this team. Tyler, I want to hear your thoughts first. What's a strength and a weakness for the St. Joe's team that fans can look out for this year?
So, the strength is the easiest. They have all of their grit energy guys back. I felt like last year they were at their best when Haskins and Finkley were on the court together in late February and then into March. And it almost didn't matter if it was Ajabo or Fleming playing the 5. And it sounds insane to say that some of their best lineups did not include Rasheer Fleming down the stretch. Honestly, for how great he was last year, he didn't close with his absolute best. But those two together just brought such a verve, such a force on the glass. And to have them back with Ajabo, to have Derek Simpson, you have the core of a good defense here. And when you start to project forward, you got to be good before you can be great. And they have the guys who are going to make them good no matter what. Kind of like LaSalle, but almost just a more proven, better version of those guys. The weakness is something that very easily could become a strength. This is a team that was not great at scoring the ball last year with Eric Reynolds and Xavier Brown. And now you look up and down the roster, there's no one who's guaranteed to replace that production. And so I think the lack of someone who you feel like can give you 20 on a given night besides Deuce Jones, who we know can do that inconsistently, but you look up and down the roster, like Jaden Glover could, Anthony Finkley could, Steven Solano could, but we don't know if those guys are going to be capable of carrying an offense more than maybe one random time throughout the season. And you're going to need that unless Deuce Jones can go from running the show 10 times a year to 20 to 25 times a year.
Yeah, it's all valid stuff there, because that was going to be mine, was the just like sheer shot creation. I mean, you had two absolutely dynamite scorers in Xavier Brown and Eric Reynolds, who could not only set the table for others, but I mean, especially in the case of Eric Reynolds, just find his shot, create separation, move without the ball. They're not going to have like a gravity guy like that, quite like they had in Eric Reynolds last year. And again, it's the thought of a Deuce Jones and Jaden Glover backcourt. I get that it was just an exhibition, but Jaden Glover had a good game, as did Deuce Jones. And it's the thought of them together. The thing is, they're both sophomores. So there's going to be some ups and downs with them their first year playing with each other. But the sheer talent they have was, in my opinion, like almost as good of a replacement job as they could have done for the two guys that they had lost. The strength, though, I will say, Tyler, I think there's a chance this defense could be even better than it was last year. Because as much as you have Ajabo back, you're going to have Steven Solano back. You can have a 7-footer, patrolling the paint at all times. But with the size and versatility at the forward spot, with your Al Amadou's, your Finkleys, and your Dacier Haskins, and I think even if you played smaller a little bit and you had maybe those three guys on the court at the same time, like you have a lot of switchability in terms of bigs and in terms of those guys guarding guards as well. But then Deuce Jones is just such a lightning rod and such a pest defensively that I think with the interior defense and the size they had, he really can give them a nuisance at the guard spot to harass the opposing ball handler, pick them up over half court. And how about just in general, when we talk to Steve, he wants to press. And when you look at a guy like Kafik Myers as well, who had to sit last year with the knee injury he sustained in high school, and even with a young guy in Austin Williford, the freshman, there's a lot of tenacity and a lot of foot speed that they really could have better defensive pressure at the guard spot than they did last year, to I think maybe even have an even better defensive team from last year. So I would look out for that. This was a good defensive team last year with the guy in Ajabo who just swatted everything and altered shots and was as good of a rim protector and rim presence as there was in the country. But look out for the guards this year and the ball pressure they're going to put on. It could be the perfect complement to the interior defense that they have.
Fair enough. And for me, a little bit of a hybrid of a couple of your guys' points. One, for strength, I'm going to go backcourt depth. I think this team's got a lot of backcourt depth. Obviously, we've talked about Jaden Glover-Toscano. We've talked about why am I not? Oh, Deuce Jones. I got blind for a second. I apologize. But then also, some other guys we just mentioned too, with Derek Simpson, who we had on with Anthony Finkley a month or so ago. But then also some of the freshmen too. Kobe mentioned Austin Williford. Owen Verna might see a little bit of time. They have a lot of depth in the backcourt, which is always a good thing, because as we've talked about a lot on these last few episodes, guard play come later in the season is huge. It's everything, some might say. So having that, along with some of the front court depth that we mentioned with, Solano and Justin Ajibor, I think that can be having the necessary backcourt depth will be big for them come those months. But then also on the flip side of that, my weakness, is actually going to be inexperience. This is a fairly young team. It kind of reminds me a little bit of the team 2 years ago when Eric Reynolds was a junior. Xavier Brown was a freshman. Finkley was a freshman. Like that team, that team might have been a little bit older. They had some other guys too, like Cam Brown, who were more senior. But this team only has 2 seniors: Derek Simpson and Justice Ajibor. A couple juniors in Finkley and Haskins, but Haskins really didn't play a lot his first year. So you're looking at a new crop of people who are going to be leading for the first time. And then you talk about the sophomores and Glover Toscano and Deuce Jones. Like, there's a lot of these players, Kafik Myers-Cope that you mentioned, who didn't play last year. There's a lot of players who are going to be contributing who maybe have not contributed or have not been, the leaders of the team in the past. So I think that inexperience, along with obviously the coaching change, and I'm sure there were some principles that Steve Donahue was going to keep from Billy Lang just because, continuity purposes and not changing too much before the season. But he also has his own system, as we know, and as we mentioned, that they're going to try to press more and everything like that. So I think that all combining with the fact that they're, a younger team, that can hurt them a little bit. I think they're going to be in games a lot. And this is kind of my comparison to a couple years ago where they were talented and they should have won more games than they did. They went 500 in league play a couple years ago. And I remember 3 games in January. One of them was against St. Louis. I forget who the other 2 were against, where they had leads and they blew them and they started 0-3 in the conference. I'm not saying they're going to do that, but that experience is very, very important to be able to close out games and not just be in games. So I think that's going to be my weakness for this team. But again, a talented team. I think they're going to be in a lot of games and they're going to win a bunch of games too. But I think maybe they might leave a little more on the table just because of experience. So that's that. All right. Tyler, Cope, one final thought on St. Joe's before we give a little conference predictions here for the rest of the A10.
I'll let our guest go first, Tyler. Go ahead.
Yeah, see, I didn't.
That's what I said.
I didn't have my St. Joe's summary point ready. I should have done that, but this is going to be one of the most fascinating teams for me to watch in the first 3 weeks. And I wish that they still had the Syracuse game early. I'm glad they were able to move that to December. But I would say, besides St. Bonaventure, this is the one team in this league that I really could see going as high as 3rd or 4th, as low as 12th, maybe even 13th. And I just really want to see how these new guards look in the first couple of weeks of the season. No matter what, this season is going to be fascinating on Hawk Hill. This could be just a complete and total implosion that leads to getting to kind of burn it to the ground, a coaching search. Those are always fun. Or this could be the start of the Steve Donahue era and the start of this Deuce Jones, Jaden Glover combination. Maybe Desir Haskins has that massive leap that everyone kind of expected him to have last year. So my final thought is the Hawks will not lack for entertainment this year. I can guarantee that.
Oh, 100%. I mean, they're already one of the best dramas in the A10, and we haven't even played a game yet. So I would certainly say that as well. I guess one overarching point to piggyback off what Tyler said, like, yes, Tyler, they'll certainly be fascinating the first couple of weeks of the season. They also don't have a particularly hard non-conference schedule that I think, like, yes, that'll be important to see how they grow. But then if these guys continue to grow and get better by the time, mid-December rolls around and we're really into conference play, then into the new year, and we can see how conference play is. Like, that's what I'm most fascinated to see, because they're going to play 2 D3 teams. They're going to play Coppin State, who's going to be one of the worst teams in D1. They're going to play Coastal Carolina. Like, they're just not going to play a ton of quality. There's not going to be a ton of, there's not a gauntlet of big games you're going to see these guys in a lot. But by the time they get to conference play is what I'm intrigued to see. But there's just so much talent on this team. The problem is, Tyler, I've said that the last 3 years about this team, about how much talent they have, and it just never seems to live up to the hype. But perhaps Steve is the coaching upgrade that some people make it out to be, and this team can end up being pretty good. They have depth. They're going to be young, but upside-wise, just with the sheer talent they have, I think there's a pretty wide range of outcomes they could have, because if this really goes off the rails, like this could maybe plummet a little bit, and there could be a coaching change at the end of the year, Tyler. So we'll see. It'll be a fascinating season for sure on Hawk Hill. But once again, sound like a broken record at this point. The talent and the players are there. just a matter of putting it all together for them.
Jake, I will jump in real quick on your non-con comment because there are some bad games, but of those three really good ones, it does include the St. Joe's equivalent in the power conferences of, wait, this team is so talented, why aren't they winning more in Syracuse? And then they go on the road to Virginia Tech, who I personally think is an NCAA tournament team. But a bottom edge, like first four level team, so that's a winnable game that is going to be quite difficult and really fascinating to watch.
Yeah, an odd like home and home because they had a neutral site game, and I guess that turned into a home and home that, yeah, they'll be playing. And you bring up a good point in the Q's game because that was like one of the hallmarks of the non-conference schedule that really would have been a bummer if they would have missed out on.
Yeah,
what a weird thing that was.
That was bizarre. I still don't quite understand. Now, obviously, the head coach change, I think that was part of it too. So that part I understand. But it seemed like they weren't going to be in the players' era anyway before that. So that was bizarre. But all right, while we have you for a few more minutes, Tyler, let's go into the A10 as a whole. Obviously, we talked about where we think St. Joe's going to finish, where we think LaSalle's going to finish. But there's a lot more in this conference. Some people think there might be finally multiple bids this year in the NCAA tournament. What do you say, and how do you think the top five or so of this conference shakes out?
God, I'm recording my predictions right after we finish this show. I'm still not 100% certain in what I have down. I think I've had four different teams in the number one slot at various points since mid-September. But where I have landed is that I believe that George Washington, St. Louis, and Dayton, in whatever order, are the class of this conference. I think VCU is right beneath them at the bottom of the same tier. And then you have this group of very good, but probably don't have the ability to be great teams right below them. George Mason, Duquesne, Loyola Chicago. And I will actually toss in Richmond, who is a team that I am significantly higher on than everyone else. But I think Dayton ends up being the best team in this conference when you take a look at just your various analytics rankings when we get to NCAA Tournament Selection Sunday. But because of some troubling depth and because of the fact that this team always seems to blow some bad games in January, I think they're the best team in the A10, but I do not think that they will win the league either in the regular season or the conference tournament.
So, Tyler, I want to ask you to dive just a little bit deeper in on VCU here, because obviously a massive Big Five tie with us, with Phil Martelli Jr. taking over. But an important principle here, because do I like VCU this year? Of course I do, because it's Phil Martelli, it's VCU, they're a machine. They're going to crank out a winner. Last year, I was really high on St. Louis. And then the year prior, I was really high on VCU hiring Ryan Odom. And every time I get excited about a new coach in year one in a spot, I always look bad, and it never works out the way it's supposed to. So even with that, because there's a lot of talent coming in here, and Phil Martelli was good at Bryant for 2 years, and they played very fast, why do you have them maybe on the outside of that top three looking in? And if you just want to break down your thoughts on them, because obviously, even with them not being a Philly team, that's probably the team we'll have our eyes on the most that aren't named LaSalle or St. Joe's.
Yeah, so it's funny. It's actually kind of the opposite as to why the Shirts and Odom teams ended up not reaching their quite sky-high expectations. Those rosters had just a couple of holes that we didn't realize in the offseason became glaring into the year. St. Louis had one of the worst benches in all of college basketball last season. Part of it was the Kellen Thames injury, but they whiffed on a couple of high-ceiling transfers. VCU was just not tough enough 2 years ago, and they needed some of their big guys to develop. They had to bring in old Big Five favorite Jack Clark, who really helped to fix that last season. This year's VCU team has the ability to cover a whole lot of holes, but where I'm very concerned is at the point guard spot. Ahmad Noel was a top 50 recruit to UConn last year. I might be dead wrong. He could be one of the 10 best players in this league. Nick Lewis is someone who I'm actually super high on, but I think it's going to take him a little bit of time to get going in his freshman year. I'm just really concerned about VCU at the most important spot on the floor, and I think that they're going to be at a detriment to a lot of other A10 teams backcourt-wise. On the wings, they are spectacular. They have depth all over. They're going to be able to beat up people at the center position, fight with the LaSalles of this conference at that spot. But I have too much concern about the backcourt to put them as my number one team. But at the same time, even if their point guards are awful, I still don't think that they'll finish any worse than maybe sixth, because the rest of the talent is still there to give them a really nice floor.
Yeah, right on. And Tyrell Ward and Nick Lewis, who decommitted from Xavier, ends up there. Like, he brings in Barry Evans. This team oozes with talent. They even have Jadrian Tracy, who Kyle once upon a time was a Billy Lang player at St. Joe's. Went to Oregon and then is back in VCU playing for Phil Martelli Jr. World's a funny place. Tyler, let me ask you one more thing, and I'll kick you back to Kyle. GW. Garrett Johnson comes back healthy. Boo Boo Benjamin, they bring in a bunch of guys in addition to a Rafael Cascio, an all-conference player, coming back. The results haven't been there year over year under Chris Caputo. They're ranked very high. They certainly have the talent to warrant that position. Is this the year they break through and potentially make the tournament, even whether that's an automatic bid? Maybe they don't quite have the non-conference schedule that gets them there. But is this the year where they're perennially one of the best teams in the conference?
Yes, they had 3 huge issues last year. They really corrected 2 of them. Just like with where I'm talking about with VCU here, they did not have a proper point guard. I think it was supposed to be some combination of Trey Moss and Gerald Drumgold. Turns out that those guys were just much better scorers than they were creators. I guess the other problem too is Jacoy Hutchison. They talked him up as an all-conference player, and none of us ever really saw that, and that never happened. Christian Jones got shoved into that spot the last 6 weeks of the year. He's just not a point guard. He's a tremendous player. I had him on the border of my top 21 in the conference, but he should not be playing point guard. They bring in Trey Dinkins over from Duquesne, Gene Aranguren from Hofstra. They have 2 spectacular veteran options there. And Dinkins really helps their three-point shooting problem, which was a huge bugaboo for them as well. And they only lost 1 game last year when they shot over 40% from 3. That was against an NCAA tournament team in VCU, but they only broke that mark 7 times. And then they just needed big forwards in the absence of Garrett Johnson. They have that now in Boo Boo Benjamin and Tyrone Marshall. I'm concerned about their ability to take care of the ball. That was a huge issue last season, but they fixed their other holes. I mean, top to bottom, if you want to go 1 to 11, I think this is the most talented roster in the A10. I have questions about how it's going to come together, but on paper, they have a chance to truly be the best in the league.
All right, final question for you, Tyler. I alluded to a little bit in my last one, but will this be a year where the A10 is a multiple bid league?
Yes. And I think the key is what I talked about at the beginning of this segment. Dayton, once again, has the hardest non-conference schedule in the A10 by a large margin. 6 huge games. You get 3 wins out of those. You're sitting pretty for an at-large bid, just like they were at Christmas the last 2 seasons. They completely threw that away last year, but we saw it in 2024 where they kind of stumbled into 3rd place, comfortably got in the tournament. And then we had a wide open A10 tournament after Duquesne shocked them in the final 30 seconds of their game. The A10 ends up with 2 teams in the tournament. I think there's enough talent at the top that even if Dayton doesn't come through, maybe VCU wins a couple of huge non-conference games. Maybe we have, say, SLU and George Washington both go 15-3 with solid non-con performances. I think this is a good year where maybe it's not quite 2 at-large bids, although I think it's good enough for it. But I think we could get an at-large, and then when that happens, the bid stealer seems to always find a way in the A10 tournament.
Always. One of the most chaotic tournaments every year is the A10 tournament.
Let me sneak in here because I know we're getting to our time limit, but I want to throw 2 more teams at you, Tyler. First, I want you to run with St. Louis, the darling of last year, seemingly the darling of this year again, with Robbie Avila somehow still having college eligibility. And then when you're done with that, Chris Mooney is a Philly guy. He used to coach at Lansdale Catholic High School right around the corner from me and Kyle, and at Beaver College, now Arcadia University, right around the corner from us. So he's a Philly guy, but I was shocked to hear you say that was your surprise team. Mike Wall's also a local guy from Conestoga High School, not too far from us as well. So tell us about SLU, but then also talk to us about why you're so high on Richmond.
So St. Louis this year seems to have actually repaired their depth. We'll see. I mean, we all like guys like Josiah Dotzler and AJ Casey at this time last year, but they kind of spread things out with their transfers. Some high conference young wild cards like Brady Dunlap, who I think is going to be a dynamite shooter in this league. Not a Gibson Jimerson replacement per se, but someone who can replace a lot of his production from beyond the three-point arc. Ishan Sharma, another promising shooter. Trey Green was a very solid Big East player as a freshman at Xavier. Injuries derailed him last year. He'll step into the point guard position. And then Quentin Jones, who was the leading scorer in the MAC for a god-awful Northern Illinois team. They seem to be convinced that this is a guy who has the skills to translate to winning. I think this offense is going to be significantly improved over last year just because they have more options. I have a lot of questions about the defense. I had a lot last year. They somehow ended up fourth in the A10 in conference play. I'm not particularly sure how that happened, eye test wise, but outside of Kellen Thames, Amari McCautry, and Paul Otieno, I'm just not sure they have very many above average defenders on this team, and that could be their own doing. And then as for Richmond, you hit the nail on the head with the key guy. It's Mike Walls. It takes Richmond centers a year to adjust to the offense. I think I've said this on every show I've been on at this point. Mike Walls was uncomfortable as a starter until February. And for the last 6 weeks of the year, he played like an all-conference level player. The talent around him is so much better. I think the guy to really watch out for is Will Johnston. Transfer from Fresno State. That is the name on the tip of the tongue of anybody who seems to have any good information about what's going on in that building. Is that he can be the sidekick there to be their top guard this season, put the ball in the hoop for him, because God knows no one was doing that once Delani Hunt went down last season.
And hey, Will Johnston, once upon a time, a Loyola Marymount transfer, who Temple was very much in on in Adam Fisher's first year. So anyway, thank you very much for that. Kyle, I'll let you finish this out because I know me and the two of us and Tyler got to run to talk more college basketball.
Listen, it's hoops, as we know. But Tyler, thank you so much for coming on, as always. And hopefully we can run this back again in a couple months and keep this cadence going because this is a lot of fun. But thank you so much for talking LaSalle, St. Joe's, A10 with us. You guys do a great job at 3-Bit League. So we're very, very appreciative and thank you for taking the time tonight.
Yeah, thank you guys for having me anytime. I'm happy to join you. It's been a fun conversation both times. So.
Absolutely. Cope, any final thoughts?
If you're coming to Glazer Arena for the first time, or you're going to come to Hagen Arena, you definitely let us know.
Yeah, we'll see. I did pull off a 4 in 24 hours 2 seasons ago with Princeton, LaSalle, St. Joe's, and Penn. So I was there for the final night of the Gola.
Oh, wow. Were you? Oh, so were we. We were there too.
Yeah, I think we were there too. Yeah.
You can't see it. My camera's not good enough, but I have my commemorative ticket from the day I stole from Rich of the Gola Boys because he had like a special plated one. So I took his crappy paper one.
That's funny.
If I didn't have a virtual background, you could see mine too.
Yeah. That's so funny. All right, Tyler, thanks again so much for coming on. Check out Tyler's stuff, especially at 3-Bit League. Like I said, they do a great job over there. So check them out on Twitter. I think you guys are on Instagram too, so there as well. No, not on Instagram. I've made
Twitter and Blue Sky, but I do some on Blue Sky. So
okay,
yeah,
Twitter and Blue Sky. We're not on Blue Sky, but actually, I think I did make a Blue Sky account and then didn't use it after like the first 2 weeks. But you guys know where to find us, of course, Instagram, Twitter, YouTube, and wherever you find your podcasts. So, Tyler, thanks once again, and we'll see you next time.
Yeah, thanks for having me, guys.